Namaste. I'd like to welcome each of you to my heart and to the Kriya Yoga teachings, which is a new patterning that we're starting. As I begin this, what I'd like to do is take the introduction and move it till after the talk that I give. So I'll start out talking, which is to talk about Patanjali Yoga Sutras, and then I'll talk for 20 minutes. After that 20-minute session, we'll turn the camera off. Right now the camera's on, but we'll turn the camera off so that sometimes people feel a little inhibited to say anything. And at that time, we'll go into like a question and answer and an open session, talk about, if you may be curious about what we're doing, what our plans are, and we'll try and answer any of the questions that you have. It's a beautiful day here in Chicago, and I hope it's a beautiful day where you're at also. I'm going to be talking about Patanjali Yoga Sutras. When I was a child, I was brought up in a Catholic household, and it had a big influence on me. My parents were devout Catholics, and I became a good Catholic also, a devout Catholic also. And for the up until eighth grade school, I was kind of immersed in this surrounding of being a spiritual or religious atmosphere. And then I went to high school and everything changed. It went from everything like being surrounded with religion and that to really a materialistic type of patterning. Where I went to high school, it was a public high school, and once in a while you'd hear the idea of God come up, but it wasn't really very often. And then I went to college and even to graduate school, and it was the same thing. In my mind, I had this dual thing happening, this duality, and all life is dual. Everything in life is dual. You look at it, everything is. You have a right hand and a left hand, up, down. And you have this duality which exists, which is religion and philosophy on one side, and on the other side, you have what in effect is materialism. And so I had that experience, and trying to get those two together, to come together, is actually very challenging psychologically. If for someone to successfully put those two together, it has to be done by effort, the effort they make to do it, and they have to work at it. If you don't, life makes no sense. Life tends to fall apart. You have this duality, which is there, and that duality exists now. It existed in my life. It exists in life, I think, with everybody here. I would expect that to be true of everybody here in this meeting, and really everybody that we meet in the world. It was true today, and it's true 5,000 years ago. And 5,000 years ago, you had this duality which existed also in the Vedic teachings. And in the Vedic teachings, I'm going back 5,000, but really they go beyond that, 10,000 years ago. There was a strong emphasis, because of the Vedas and this idea of the Vedas, to put a strong emphasis on philosophy in terms of religion and philosophy. And there were a lot of schools that existed at that time, the Vedic times, that taught different types of, they taught philosophy, which was Vedic, but they used their own viewpoint, their own vantage point that they talked about it. And so a lot of schools of philosophy, Vedic philosophy, came up. Now, over time, that kind of got narrowed down to 6 schools. And of those 6 schools, 5 of the schools were philosophical. It was all about philosophy. That would be the Nyaya Vaisheshika school, the Shankya school or Sankhya school was philosophical. And then you have Mimamsa and Vedanta. So those are 5 schools. And those 5 schools were dealing with the philosophy and dealing with life. How do you deal with the marriage? How do you keep it? That was part of it. It's all aspects of life. But it also included the things that we traditionally think of when we think of religion was, what's God and whose God is, does God really exist type of thing. And Atma is Brahman and reincarnation and all of these philosophical ideas. And all of these philosophical ideas were talked about in the 5 schools. So it was all about philosophy. It was all about religion. And that was true of the 5 schools, but there was one school that was different. It was the opposition. This school dealt with spirituality and techniques, which is the key point. You had 5 schools, they all dealt with philosophy and dealing with life and all of that, and materiality too, and all of that part of it. But then you had this one school which was very unique, very different. It dealt with techniques. It dealt with the spiritual aspect, and it dealt with saying not what is God, but how do I talk to God? That's what spirituality is. The philosophical schools are about God and about life. Yoga, the spiritual school, is life. It's experiencing life. And so it comes down to dealing with techniques. In the old days, the swamis, the priests, the saints and sages had very strong minds. And I know one of the things when I first started coming to the temple, Kriyananda talked about how in those times, at the times that I'm talking, the Vedic times, these people had very strong, very powerful minds, very influential. And they would go out and they would talk with the people, interface with the people, the householders. And there was this interaction that took place, and they would teach about it, and they would spend the day teaching about it. And then eventually they would collect very curious students, and this teacher would, and the student would, or a group of students would go into the woods, the forests. And in the forests, they would continue the teachings, but they would expand on the teachings, and these would become the future teachers. And all of this was happening. And then, like I said, you had the philosophy, which was espoused, which was talked about and which was given. But then in addition to that, you had this one special school, the School of Yoga, which taught techniques. Now, in teaching the techniques, it was all verbal. It was done on a verbal level. And then at some point, this verbal level, they say because we moved into Kali Yuga, became threatened. By threatened, it means it was changing. There was something changing about it. The eternal truth was changing. And so there was a mythical figure that came along, Patanjali, and he codified the yoga teachings, the Yoga Sutras, in the sutras. And what the sutras were a series of bullet points. Now we call them shlokas or paragraphs or whatever you want, but these were actually bullet points. In other words, a person would look at it and he would see that everybody's talking and philosophizing, and the realization, or the Swami, the teachers realize everybody's talking about philosophies, and then he would say, okay, now we stop the philosophy, and now yoga. And this became the first aphorism in the Yoga Sutras. Atha Yoga, that's Sanskrit. Atha Yoga was now yoga. And that was espoused, taught by Patanjali, or codified by Patanjali. And it was close to 200, it was around 200 aphorisms. And that became the Yoga Sutras. And so what he said was, we've been doing all this philosophy. Fine, that's great. Now, yoga. That's book 1, aphorism 1 of Patanjali Yoga Sutras. Now, from that, okay, so we're going to do yoga, we're going to do techniques, but what's the purpose? Why are we doing that? That's the next question. Okay, well, we're going to do yoga. Why are we going to do yoga? And what Patanjali says, the reason we're going to do yoga is yoga chitta vritti nirodha, which means the cessation of the fluctuations of the mind stuff. That's what yoga is about. I'm done. I finished early. Yoga is about nirodha, which means to stop, the vritti, which means the fluctuations, chitta, of the mind stuff. Yoga is about stopping the fluctuations of the mind stuff. And it's one of the key things to remember in talking about the yoga is that it's about stopping the fluctuations of the mind stuff. Then you say, well, why are we doing this? What's the purpose of stopping the fluctuations of mind? And what his response was, the reason was Ishwara Prani Dhanava, which means devotion to Ishwara. The reason it's being done is to become aware of Ishwara. Ishwara is the God of gods. And that's what Ishwara is. If Ishwara is the God of gods, then the question is, well, what is God? Well, later on, after the Yoga Sutras was written, the saints and sages came up with this concept of Ishta Devata. And Ishta Devata is the concept of God. Ishta Devata is God. Ishwara is the God of the Ishta Devatas. And Ishta Devata means chosen form of deity. So this talk is going online, and so there will be people, a lot of the people here today are already familiar with it. For those people that will hear this afterwards, aren't familiar with the concept of Ishta Devata, what you have to do is you'll have to go online. I'll save that for a future talk. But you go online and Ishta, Ishta Devata, Devata, and you Google it, and it'll describe it, but it means chosen form of deity. And so what you do is every person has a chosen form of deity, Ishta Devata. And that's divinity, that's God for you, for that person. And what you're trying to do with yoga, and what yoga leads to, is trying to make a connection between you and your Ishta Devata. And you make that connection and you work with that connection. And then what that does is that leads to an awareness and understanding of what Ishwara is. And how do you do this? You do this by the methodology of techniques. And that's what the temple is about. The temple of Kriya Yoga is not about teaching all of this philosophy. The temple of yoga, Kriya Yoga, is about teaching techniques. Every class that Kriyananda taught, he always had a technique that he gave in the class, always. So yoga, his teaching was about the techniques. The talk that he did was chatter. It was fluff. It was extra. Yoga is about the techniques. Since yoga is about techniques, I want to conclude this very quick introduction to yoga and presentation by giving you a technique. I think that kind of follows, and it'll be the technique that, at least in my mind, goes along with the Kriya yoga teachings. And here's the very simple, very short, very simple. Train your mind in the morning when you wake up to think of your Ishta Devata. And after you've got your mind trained to think of your Ishta Devata, so you wake up, you get out of bed, and when you get out of bed, you, I don't know, maybe splash some water. I do a little bit of preparation, walk around a little bit, move from the dream state into the awakened state. And then once you have your senses about you, you're back, you've awakened, you go to your place of meditation, wherever that might be, and you sit down and you say to your Ishta Devata, welcome to my heart. And welcome to my home. So that's the technique. And then you're done. So, it takes what, 30 seconds? And as you do that, day after day after day, what happens is slowly what sinks into your mind is that, yes, we have life and we have the materiality and everything that's surrounding the material life. But you start to make a connection with your Ishta Devata, and you come to the realization that your Ishta Devata is God. And that when you're saying hello to your Ishta Devata and welcome to your Ishta Devata, you are saying hello to God. And even beyond that, to the God of God. And you are making a connection between you and this life and God, the life divine, the spiritual life. And so that's the first session in our Kriya Yoga teachings, and I'll conclude with that thought.